Let me make an analogy between programs and recipes. So a program is a lot like a recipe. Each one is a list of steps to be carried out with rules for how to tell when you're done or when to go back. At the end, there's a certain result. If you cook, you probably exchange recipes with your friends. And you probably change recipes too. And if you've made changes and you like the results and your friends like eating it, then you might give them the changed version of the recipe. So imagine a world where you can't change a recipe because somebody has gone out of his way to set it up so that it's impossible to change it. And imagine that if you share the recipe with your friends, they will call you a pirate and try to put you in prison for years.
I use the word hacker in its correct and original sense to describe a person who pursues computer programming as a kind of artistic passion and who also is part of or identifies with the hacker culture, which is a group of programmers historically that has produced the internet and Linux and the World Wide Web.
I guess you have to be a hacker in order to understand the specific mindset. That is, to rebel against the idea that the underlying source code for a computer operating system should be withheld. This open source attitude doesn't mix smoothly with the concept of free market economy. It is also a threat to the traditional concepts of copyright and intellectual property. Companies like Microsoft that base their business on closed source code have tactically molded free software into an image of a monster of almost McCarthyian proportions. All this made up one of the strangest success stories of the 1990s, epitomized by the community's gifted leader and invaluable icon, who planted the seed for a movement whose ramifications continue to spread.
Linus Torvalds har skapat ett datasystem som har slagit hela branschen med häpnad.
Linux, an operating system that now runs 8 million of the world's computers.
Wired-lehti julistaa tämän nuoren miehen Väinämöisen veroiseksi shamaaniksi, jonka kehittämä Linux-käyttöjärjestelmä on internetin upein mestarituote.
Torvalds' decision to distribute Linux for free and reveal its underlying source code has made him a quasi-cult figure.
Linus Torvalds datageniet som drömmer om att fälla Microsoft-jätten Bill Gates. Hur går det?
Det finns de som säger att Linus Torvalds har åstadkommit ett mirakel.
These worker ants are constantly in contact with each other by modems, releasing code, encouraging feedback and modifications to create the best possible operating system in the world.
I didn't want anybody else to have to go through the same thing I had. We were trying to find something like Linux, so I decided, maybe some other computer science student out there needs his own operating system. Then he doesn't have to start from scratch. It wasn't the big fight against the windmills. It was not Don Quixote against the world trying to make a better place.
Kom, vill du ha mat? Vill du ha mat?
I much prefer working with people over email than face-to-face. Face-to-face, you tend to get into all these meeting arguments and all the details that really shouldn't matter. Over email, you have to kind of think a bit before you send off a reply.
Just because we're not in the same place doesn't mean that we aren't sort of together in a social sense. It's like one very, very large shared office. We even have our arguments and squabbles over the internet in the same kind of way.
I mean, this is a huge project. There has never been a software project that I know of that's been worked on by so many people from so many dispersed places to put this all together.
The most innovative thing about the Linux community is not its source code, but the social machine that has developed around the source code.
What Linux is, I suppose I would say every computer is different. Every floppy disk drive is different, every hard disk is different, every video controller is different, and Linux is the thing that knows how to make all these different kinds of parts on a computer do the simple things that people would consider a simple task, like write my file out to the disk, or read this file off this floppy I have, or draw this image on the screen. Linux knows how to talk to these different pieces of hardware and make them do the common operations that we need computers to do every day.
What do we mean when we say Linux? Some mean the whole computer operating system on which everything that happens in a computer lays. Some say Linux, pinpointing at the single most important program, the kernel.
It has to go back to the person who started it, to the person who somehow used the net to create a community of people who all felt that their contributions were being valued. And that ability to foster cooperation could very well be something that could only come from a person raised in a country like Finland.
(1969). It seems to have been such a good year. The landing of the moon, Woodstock, the birth of ARPANET that led to internet. The first steps of Unix, the operating system for big computers. And on the 28th of December, Linus Torvalds is born.
Alla barn lär sig huvudsakligen genom att de leker. Och av den orsaken tror jag det var till och med oerhört viktigt för Linus att han kom in i datavärlden när datamaskiner ännu var så enkla att det också för en 10-12-årig pojke var lätt att begripa vad som fanns inne i den här maskinen. I dagens värld så finns det redan så många lager av information och bilder och invecklade grejer emellan det som kommer ut i datamaskinens skärm och det som finns bakom inne i maskinen. Att det tror jag är oerhört svårt för dagens pojkar och flickor att leka sig fram till den insikt som Linus lekte sig fram till.
Jag tror det var kärlek vid första ögonkastet både för min pappa och för Linus som tillsammans var barnsligt förtjusta båda två i att pröva de möjligheter som VIC-20 det gav. Platsen där Linus utvecklar Linux finns ju inte mer eftersom väggarna har rivit. Här i det här hörnet eller ungefär här som nu är soffa så var Linus skrivbord och dator som han jobbar med. Jag skulle säga att den största förändringen är faktiskt just det att han är så numera är, som jag brukar säga, en stand-up-guru för att han är van att uppträda för publik och han kan ta sin publik. Det är kanske inte förvånande men i alla fall frapperande när man jämför med hurdan han faktiskt var och det där relativt blyg och tillbakadragen och inte den som själv tog kontakt utan hans vänner var de som höll kontakt med honom.
Hello everybody out there using Linux. I'm doing a free operating system, just a hobby, won't be big and professional like GNU for 386 and 486 AT clones. This has been brewing since April and is starting to get ready. I'd like any feedback on things people like or dislike in Linux, as my OS resembles it somewhat. Any suggestions are welcome, but I won't promise I'll actually implement them. Linus Torvalds@kruunahelsinki.fi.
1991. The Soviet Union closes down. The Gulf War. British physicist Tim Berners-Lee releases a hypertext system, calling it the World Wide Web. Microsoft is well on the way for world domination. And on the 17th of September, Linus Torvalds sends the first version of Linux, 0.01, to the world via internet. The first responses arrive within hours.
Siitä alkoi ensin kuulua tuolla kahvilassa kertomuksia, että tällainen ohjelmisto on ja että se on alkanut levitä. Ja tästä Linuxesta kuultiin myös sitten, että mikähän on miehiä. Kyllä hän niin oli herättänyt huomiota laitoksella kyvyillään siihen mennessä.
Linux based Linux on Unix because of its basic ideals. The original Unix operating system had been created by Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie at AT&T's Bell Labs in 1969. Unix was in the beginning a relatively free operating system and very popular in university circles. The philosophy is based on two notions. Firstly, everything is a file. Secondly, when you build something, you write things that are for a single purpose, but that do that purpose well.
Putting Linux out on the net was kind of the natural thing to do in many ways. And there were a lot of small reasons, like the fact that I thought it was a good idea anyway to make Linux available to others so that they could try it out and send comments back to me.
He really had two choices. He could make it completely free, or he could try and charge for it.
Linuxista ei olisi tullut yhtään mitään, jos hän olisi ottanut siitä taloudellista hyötyä, myynyt sitä. Ei kukaan olisi ostanut sitä. Se olisi ollut ihan dead end.
Siitä onkin vähän aikaa, kun täällä viimeksi olet käynyt, että tässä on jo vaihdettu Linuxin jakelukone 3 uuteen versioon. Että...
Joo. Meillä oli aluksi vaikeuksia saada Linux-kamat mahtumaan niille.
Näin oli, joo. Nämä oli...
Alun perin Linus ei halunnut julkistaa Linuxia mitenkään vapaaksi. Se mietti sitä hyvin pitkään, että minkälaisen copyrightin alle Linux laitetaan. Ja sitten mä sain pikkuhiljaa ylipuhuttua Linuxin julkistamaan Linuxin GNU-copyrightin alla.
Especially as the compiler I used was released under the GPL, I eventually ended up using the GPL myself.
The GNU General Public License, GPL, funded by the Free Software Foundation in the mid-1980s, says that if you change and modify the code, you have to make your changes and improvements freely available to anyone. The GPL hinders any one person to have a monopoly over an important piece of technology.
I think that the timing was definitely, even just a year earlier, I don't think it could have been done. and a year later somebody else would have done something similar. The internet was basically, hadn't gotten started in kind of the general population, but it was getting very strong in university networks.
Mä olin tehnyt siellä postituslista-ohjelmiston ja sitä piti koko ajan laajentaa sinne lisää ominaisuuksia. Ihmisiä alkoi olemaan tuhansia hyvin varhaisessa vaiheessa jo kiinnostuneita. Se oli varsinainen yllätys, koska se niin kuin tuplaantui aika pienin aikavälein. Se on ihan käsittämätöntä, että 1000 ihmisestä tulee seuraavana päivänä 2000 ihmistä ja sitten tulee 4000 sitä seuraavana. Joo, ilman internettiä se Linuxin kehittäminen on ollut kirjesakkia.
My name of choice was Freaks, F-R-E-A-X, which was both the free and freak plus the X that you need to have for Unix.
En tykännyt ajatuksesta nimittää sitä Freaksiksi. Se ei ollut kauhean myyvä nimi.
Ari Lemke, who actually put it up for FTP, thought that it really was a bad idea and really hated the name, and he made the FTP site available for it, and he just called it Linux because he knew that was the working name, and the name stuck, and Linux is the much better name.
All right, we've got an impressive set of geeks and nerds here. And the first question is from the easy category. How do you pronounce Linux?
Well, I pronounce Linux as Linux. However, the total answer to that is, if you are Linus Torvalds, you probably pronounce it as Linux. On the other hand, if you come from the West Coast of the United States, you pronounce it as Linux. And as he said, he doesn't care how you pronounce it as long as you just use it.
It was in July of 1991, which was shortly after Linus had released the 0.09 version of the kernel, that I started playing with Linux. Heard about it on, I think, Usenet, downloaded it from Finland, started playing with it, thought it was really neat. And at that point, there was very limited transatlantic internet bandwidth. So it was very painful to download all these packages from Finland. And so I decided, well, we need to do something about this. And I used my personal workstation that was on my desk, which was tsx11.mit.edu. And I set up a mirror archive of all the kernel sources on my private workstation. And that was the first US Linux FTP site that came into existence.
The first time I got Linux was I downloaded the floppy images for Linux, and in the Penn State University computer lab, I installed it on one of their machines, and they subsequently kicked me out of the computer lab that day. But that was my first experience with Linux.
Fairly early in '92, suddenly I didn't know everybody anymore. That it was no longer me and a couple of friends. It was me and a couple of hundred people who I had no idea where they were, what they did with the system, and who they are. And that was a big step. The 1.0 release in '94 was certainly important, and it meant a lot to me just because there was a lot of work behind it. It was certainly a landmark to commercial use of Linux. It was really hard to use Linux commercially before 1.0.
Toivotan teidät tervetulleeksi tähän Linux-käyttöjärjestelmän julkistamistilaisuuteen.
Miksi tämmöistä Unixia ollenkaan tehdään, varsinkin tämmöisessä yliopistoympäristössä, on se, että niitä kyllä on olemassa PC-koneillekin, mutta niiden hintataso on erittäin korkea. Eli kun esimerkiksi DOS nostaa kotikoneeseen 200 markalla, niin tuommoinen Unix-kotikoneeseen maksaa helposti 20 000 markkaa, mikä on opiskelijalle hiukan liian paljon. Menkää vaikka jonnekin tietokonekauppaan, niin kysykää, että onko teillä SCU Unix, niin ne katsoo teitä kysyen ja sanoo, että ei, emme. Itse asiassa paljon helpompi kirjoittaa sitten.
The development process of Linux is odd. It is not a hierarchy where everyone is free to suggest and send changes to the code. There's one person who leads, makes the big decisions, and chooses the best ideas. Linus, the benevolent dictator.
Everyone knew that someone had to be the head of this work group, and Linus was the natural head given that he did the original core Linux kernel, and Linus was someone who was a very, very good leader. He's someone who's actually quite humble. You know, he doesn't try to take credit for stuff that he doesn't do.
You want to have hundreds, thousands of people working on the kernel at the same time, but you don't want to have all these people stepping on each other's toes all the time, because that way you will just get, most of the time will be spent on just resolving conflicts between people. You just have flame wars all the time. I used to think that it was this hierarchy where I was at the top and they were my lieutenants, and I don't think it's that way anymore. It's more like a web of trust where I have people I trust and they have people they trust.
Well, there are lots of things that motivate developers. There's artistic pride, the satisfaction that you get from doing good craftsman-like work. There's the idealist's feeling of being something larger and part of something larger and more important than you are. There's a desire to help the world and see good solutions happen. In the absence of monetary rewards, most people, most of the time, are playing for a kind of reputation reward among their peers.
One strength of the Linux development world is that practically every software author can be contacted directly by email. Ted Zoe was crucial in the spread of Linux in the United States.
To be fair, it's very easy to say, if we were in charge, we wouldn't do these things. But then again, we're not getting all these email messages saying, please, let me add this new feature. And so I don't know what I would actually do if I were really in charge.
Dave Miller is a maintainer who reviews changes that developers want to make in the kernel. He's like a funnel between the contributors and the King Linus.
The way that we work is you can talk all day about a great idea or a solution to a problem or something that you think is an interesting feature for Linux to have. But you've got to show me something concrete. Show me a piece of code that does that. So something that's tangible that I can test myself so that I can try it out and I can think about what it is instead of just talking abstractly about a topic all day.
Alan Cox, a Renaissance hacker, is the closest collaborator to Linus, his right-hand man.
To me, code has more in common with, for example, poetry or some kinds of writing. And the beauty of it is in structure, in putting ideas across one at a time in a clear way. So a good piece of code you can read without comments, and it's immediately obvious why it's been written, how it's elegant. And so you're looking for code which is both clean and elegant, but also doesn't rely on sort of clever programming tricks, doesn't make assumptions which may not be true in the future. Because the last thing we want to do is to have much code in the Linux kernel which requires large amounts of effort to keep it working. We want code which will just continue to work and work forever.
Having led the Linux project for 5 years in Helsinki, Linus was recruited to Silicon Valley, California. He wanted to see the other side of the world of commerce, not just the academic side.
You're quite an unorthodox figure in the Silicon Valley world. What do they make of you there? You've not taken the crazy commercial part, if you like.
Feel like a king of America. Southbound Redwood Parkway. The weather's quite like the Antarctica. You're never alone in Silicon Valley, USA. Seems I was the chosen prodigy, writing for the sonnets by Shakespeare. Some sort of alchemy, they couldn't even get near. And they didn't inherit the earth. The East, they found the wealth, they probably sell the shares as soon as you can. Get out and go on to the next thing. Retire young, should have been the king of America. The weather's quite like the Antarctica. Southbound Vertigo Parkway.
Linus started to work for a company called Transmeta. Not a Linux company, but a mysterious business that didn't want to tell for many years what it was up to. And paradoxically, a closed source code company. The deal was that Linus could still concentrate on developing Linux.
I have been forced into trying to be a kind of poster boy for Linux. And actually the whole open source community at large, even though I wasn't even the person who started open source.
There's no single person that represents the whole story, and there's no single starting point. I mean, it's like the bamboo. You don't know where it starts, where it ends.
I don't think that this movement is actually new at all. It's been around for a long time. You know, even in the 70s, you know, the whole attitude that we had around Unix, even though technically it wasn't open source, it wasn't free, because you did need to go and get this license from AT&T, but you know, since that was not an issue generally, you could share things freely.
When you run a program, typically you run the executable form, which is a series of numbers. Now, nobody can make any sense of those numbers. Only a computer can understand them. That's what they're for. Those numbers are the form of a program that the computer itself can understand. But for humans to figure out what they mean is very hard. When we write software, we write it as source code. Source code looks sort of like algebra. That's the form that you can understand if you're a programmer. To help you figure out, there are usually lots and lots of comments, which are explanations that are put into the source code to help other people figure out why the program is written the way it is. If you get just the executables, which is what Microsoft will probably give you, even if you had the freedom to make changes, you could never figure out what changes to make. It's too hard. For the freedom to change the software to be practical and usable, you've got to have the source code.
If you really look at the project, if you really look at the, as I said, Linus developed the kernel, but the whole system is really not. I think that the most interesting part here is really Richard Stallman began the movement.
Have you heard of Richard Stallman?
He wanted everyone to have the rights to use the software, to copy the software without breaking any laws, to make changes, distribute them, enhance it, right? He wanted to give people rights.
When he decided to overthrow corrupt American capitalism in the computer industry, he quit his job and he continued coding.
Join us now and share the software. You'll be free, hackers. You'll be free. Join us now and share the software. You'll be free, hackers. You'll be free.
I tend to think of things in terms of justice, freedom, and ethics. I announced the idea in November '83, but it was in January '84 that I quit my job at MIT to start developing a free operating system, to which I gave the name GNU.
This is GNU, this is GPL, the GNU General Public Licensing. And of course, the kernel is under GPL.
Free software, I should explain, refers to freedom, not price. It's unfortunate that the word free in English is ambiguous. It has a number of different meanings. One of them means zero price, but another meaning is that you have freedom. So think of free speech, not free beer. There is a similarity between the folk process, where a poem or a song or a story can get refined and reshaped by one teller or singer after another, and the way free software gets improved. You'll often find cases where a free program is being developed now by a group of people who include none of the original developers. In 1991, we had almost finished the GNU system. Our goal was to make an operating system like Unix, but entirely free software. This complete operating system required many different components. By 1991, we had almost all of those components. Many of them we had written, and many others we had found somebody else had written it for his own purposes, but it did the job. And so we pressed it into service as a part of GNU. One major component was still missing, the component called the kernel. So it was very useful that Linus Torvalds wrote a kernel. At that point, combining his kernel, Linux, with the larger GNU system produced a complete runnable system that you could actually put onto your PC and run. So once Linux was developed, the GNU system in effect was completed, and it began to catch on in popularity. But at the same time, an unfortunate thing happened. The people who were using the GNU system didn't realize it was the GNU system. So they began calling the whole combination Linux. And that confusion spread. And as a result, it's very hard for us in the GNU project to call the user's attention to the ethical and political issues.
Hoarders can get piles of money, that is true. Hackers, that is true. But they cannot help their neighbors, that's not good. Hackers, that's not...
Most computer science in the USA comes traditionally from military background and defense spending. Perhaps it isn't any more quirky that nowadays free software movement finds room both for Richard Stallman and libertarian ideals. Many saw free software also as a new way of making money and needed a less radical concept. Enter open source.
We looked at the history of advocacy in what at the time was still mostly called the free software movement, and we concluded that it hadn't worked. That in fact the rhetoric and the tactics used by Richard Stallman and the Free Software Foundation had probably left us worse off than we were when we started.
The term open source doesn't really imply a lot of political issues like it used to. The free software term still does.
There is now a second movement, the open source movement, where they consider only the practical benefits, and they refuse, and I mean that literally, they carefully avoid the issues of principle, freedom, ethics, and making a good society for people to live in.
That kind of language is implicitly threatening to people whose day-to-day concerns are, how do I increase my shareholder value? You know, how do I keep control of my business? How do I address my actual down-to-earth problems? People like that, you know, when you walk into their offices and say, you should use all open source for your business because sharing is good and hoarding is evil, it doesn't work. It just doesn't, as communication, it fails.
I am not against business. I don't believe in abolishing business. I do business myself. But I believe business should not dominate all of life. The rules of society should not be chosen primarily to please business.
In early 1998, majority usage in the community went from free software to open source in 6 weeks flat in the late spring, early summer of 1998. And that told me that there had been huge pent-up demand in the community for a way of explaining what we were doing that was more effective. The whole attitude in the trade press and in the investor community completely turned around, 180 degrees. The same people who had spent years and years and years sneering dismissively at free software and, talking about, sandal-wearing freaks with long hair, those very same people within a year were falling all over themselves to write laudatory articles about the wonders of open source and peer review. And this was really funny because it was the same software and in most cases the same people.
Linux happened without the help of people with deep pockets, or even despite the help. How can we keep from destroying the magic by pouring all of this money into Linux?
When Linux started to become commercialized, people said, oh, well, we'd like to keep it as our own little project and things like that, and nobody should be making any money off of it. Well, in the real world, people make money off of things. In the United States, it's a capitalistic society. In Europe, it's a capitalistic society. And in order for companies to start using Linux, they want to have somebody sitting there who can give them support, who can sell them the hardware, who can do all this type of thing. And these people who sell this hardware and sell the support are going to make money.
Not every one of us is a hacker. Actually, very few of us will take the effort to download our own Linux from the net. Even fewer will tackle with the code itself in order to improve it. Though Linux was hard to use, customers valued strongly its reliability and open source code. There was an opportunity for companies with new visions.
For Red Hat, it wasn't important that we ship a better operating system than Microsoft's or Sun Microsystems. It becomes really important that we ship an operating system that solves a problem for our customers that they cannot solve using the traditional proprietary binary-only software. We're recognizing what we were doing was we were building technology and then giving it away. So we said, well, how do you make money doing this? And of course, we would go to California, to Silicon Valley, and everyone would say, well, you cannot make money in the software business giving your technology away. And we would come back and we'd talk to our customers and we'd realize the only thing that kept our customers loyal to what we were doing was that we did give away our technology. For the very first time, they had control over the technology they're using.
The real value in most software products is the active maintenance down the line, the continuing support relationship between the vendor and you. And that's what gives software fundamentally the characteristics of a service industry rather than a manufacturing industry.
Linux is flourishing in the Internet Server Appliance area. But because there has not been an easy-to-use software for home users, it has only a small margin of the desktop market. GNOME project, with its graphical interface, tries to fill that gap. But hacker elitism still seems to follow Linux.
Hey, Evie, you see who's here? It's a pigwig. Hi, pigwig. It's Tux, actually. Hi, Tux.
Samalla kun Linus Torvaldsin työ poikii uusia miljonääriä ja miljardööriä, hän aiheuttaa harmaita hiuksia maailman toistaiseksi rikkaimmalle miehelle Bill Gatesille.
Microsoft has a very traditional model. They make closed source code, they put it on a CD, they sell that. Now, they take on all the burden of development themselves. Everything goes back through them. Once you're in that business, it's very hard to change your culture. It's very hard to change your business to one where you cooperate, where programmers are used to releasing code.
It's easier to make money off of closed source products if you don't need to, or you have the huge market share. So, for example, Microsoft does not have a huge incentive to open source their code right now, and it would probably cut into their profits. So I don't think they're going to do it, or at least not willingly. There's algorithms that you may, in fact, want to keep proprietary. For example, I know of certain compression algorithms that companies have put a lot of work into for things like streaming media. And they don't want people to know how they do that, because it's exactly how they do that that is the value of their product.
Fighting between Linus, who's the leader of Linux, and Bill Gates, who's the leader of Microsoft, and it becomes really personal.
And for our bizarre question, whose lips are these?
I'd say there's a Bill Gates lips telling another lie.
The acceptance of Linux has been helped enormously by the fact people have known that Linux exists through the news. And the David versus Goliath story helped there, but I don't think it was particularly true.
You're a socialist.
That's one of the labels people put on.
Is that true?
Det är ju ingen hemlighet, jag tillhörde radikalerna i slutet av 60-talet med gamla studenthus och studenternas FN-förening som organiserade nästan alla demonstrationer på den tiden.
My personal belief system is more one of personal honor. And I don't care what anybody else does. I want to do what I feel is right.
Att Linus håller sig oerhört på ett mycket bestämt avstånd från det där, från politik, och det hänger säkert ihop med att han så att säga skadades lite under sin tidigaste barndom av en mycket aktiv och politisk far.
It is also about having a social conscience. And if you call that socialism, then yeah, I guess I'm socialist.
Att han är radikal inom ett ganska bestämt område där han själv skapar ramarna för sitt område, eller han går, som jag upplever det, oerhört ogärna ut i det där i lösa, lite flummiga samhällspolitiska resonemang. Och där finns den här skiljelinjen mellan den här pragmatikern som vill syssla med någonting som är kännbart och inte låta liksom ångan åka ut genom det där öronen och flumma iväg om någonting som vi gärna gjorde på 60-talet.
This is a community you can take, but you must give back. I am very pleased to announce to you today that the winner of this year's IDG Linus Torvalds Award is Debbie.
It's good that the Linux community has been fairly positive towards new things, including the commercial efforts.
I'm from Brazil, and I would like to know what can we do to bring you to Brazil in May next year.
Can you come to the VA party Wednesday night?
I will almost certainly be there, yes. Okay. But I need to go to the
See you later.
I'm hearing that you're going shooting during the
Well, you come with us, man.
No.
Tell him Anita said hi, and I'm still working on my speed. Tell him that. He'll know it on time.
I'm sure a lot of the community is worried that, you know, these big enterprises, these big commercial vendors are not going to be able to give back to the community.
The thing is that people expect other people to be nice and take care of things, and I don't think that is true, and I don't think that it should be true, and I think the power of Linux is that even if nobody else helps you an inch of the way, you still have your own copy of Linux, and you still have your own power to do whatever you want. And I think just because I want to avoid the politics of Linux, I want to be somebody that everybody agrees is a nice guy and he doesn't buy shit.
Next just one last question.
Sure.
I'm from India. Do you get a lot of developers from India contributing to the kernel?
Not that many.
What is the message that you would like to give them so that you get more and more of them?
I think one of the problems is just infrastructure. They don't even necessarily have internet access, or they have very slow internet access. And I think that people are also maybe not used to do this collaboration on the internet, and they're kind of nervous, right?
Any message you want to give them to motivate them to get more of those developers?
I don't know what the issues are in India. There are going to be issues that are like local issues that Indians want to be able to do things that the American continent doesn't care about at all. And I think that's really motivational when somebody says, hey, I can solve this and I can make my own version of Linux and it will be better for me, right, as an Indian or as a just whatever person. And that's how you should be motivated. And whatever I say, you should not care.
You'll find out firsthand, Linus. What Indian problems are you working?
I don't want one more. We can just one more.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
If you come down to India next time.
I will try to, but I will take a holiday.
And if you want to take a picture for Dutch magazines. Okay. Are you planning on coming to the Netherlands?
The real value of Linux may be somewhere else than knocking Microsoft out. Linux was designed to run on a cheap hardware and to solve common problems. If you are poor, it is a real alternative, free of charge. Linux projects started in Europe and the United States. But by now, free software allows it to find ever more new programmers from new sources, from regions where computing is still in its infancy.
因为你也知道，中国这个整个在信息产业方面，在世界就比较落后啊，落后于世界那个发达国家有很大的距离。那么中国在发展过程中，希望尽快赶上去。那么赶上去的话，我们要有借助国外的很多经验。那么其中，比如说对于操作系统，我们是非常重视的。那么虽然原来我们基于像 Unix 我们也做了一些工作开发，但是由于在市场观念不对，我们这方面发展不是很好。那么 Linux 是一个很好的机会，给我们提供了可以学习世界上先进技术的这么一个基础。
And I think that this is the greatest transfer of wealth we may have ever seen between kind of the industrialized rich North. And, I'll put Europe and the United States together in that, and the third world.
就是open source， 就是开发源代码。我觉得这一点呢，对很多人来讲是非常重要的。因为我毕竟是很喜欢哲学，所以我很多时候喜欢从哲学的这种角度来看，就是说，我觉得它是比较符合科学精神，就是说把这些知识共享，就不会有任何的隐瞒。就我觉得印象比较深是这些。
我在那个工作上面加个 Linux 服务器吧，起身说要。好啊，我加完了再跟你们说吧。OK。
其他领域，所以我从来不把它看作只是在这个电脑界里面才会有作用的。
You have basically one of the most privileged classes in capitalism, programmers. They can make so much money from working as programmers that they have the time to devote to their own hobbies. Programmers like Alan Cox, they could name their price. Here are these people who are at the top of the heap, and You know, through the structure of transfer of intellectual property that they've come up with, they are transferring that wealth. You know, it is socialism in action, even if the libertarians, you know, are horrified whenever that is mentioned.
Open source projects have been compared to the way science is created. Science in itself doesn't make money. The wealth comes as a result of applications. For the open source hackers, developing Linux has traditionally been a science-like voluntary project, a hobby. Eventually, the best Linux hackers were enlisted. In 1999, during the dot-com boom, some of the Linux companies went public. Wall Street announced record-breaking value for Linux stock. Of course it didn't last, but for a period of time, some Linux hackers were filthy rich, on paper.
Just about everyone who was a core developer before all this hoopla about people making money doing Linux is that they've kept to their values in taking these jobs. Most of us, at least the ones that I keep in contact with, have a very cushy position and pretty much are doing all the Linux work they were doing before they had the job, and within the same levels of freedom as well. So I still got changes from people every day the same way I always did. I still submitted them to Linux the same way I always did before the IPO. Some of us are driving nicer cars than beforehand. That's the only difference. And maybe we're eating a little bit more sushi.
There are some people who got lucky, joined the right company at the right time, managed to participate in the IPO lottery. And there are some people who got millions of dollars, and there are some people who got billions of dollars. And, you know, did those people actually contribute more to the company than those other people? In some cases, they just happened to contribute the right amount of investment money at the right time. And I think that's a generic problem. It's not unique to the open source community. And I don't know that we actually have a good solution for that.
Part of what I like about Silicon Valley is just that it's so dynamic and you can do anything here. And even the money-grabbing approach, I mean, even if it's slightly tasteless, especially when you come from Europe, it's a really good motivational factor, and it's a really good way of getting things done. Has it changed me? I assume so. I mean, it's not the same. I'm not the same person I was when I moved, but I don't think it's made me all that more money conscious than I used to be.
2001, imagined by Stanley Kubrick. In the most ambitious and grotesque PR stunt in history, suicide hijackers blitz America, with far-reaching consequences. IT recession affects also open source. No longer does Linus have to act in public all the time, as an enlightened philosopher ruler, harassed by the media. But the coolness of Linux still intact. The phenomenon disappears into gadgets, invisible pieces of technology for households and entertainment industry. Gradually, many of us turn into Linux users when the code infiltrates our clocks, toasters, and mobile phones. As for bigger ideals, it could be one of the greatest missed opportunities of our times. If free software liberated nothing but code.
There's no question that development of technology is just going to make Linux obsolete at some point. And the question is just how long will it take?
Andy, your interface.
Will it be 5 years? Will it be 15 years? Or will it be 50 years? And I think one of the powers of open source is that in 50 years, the next operating system that's the best at the time will be able to take advantage of the source base that Linux had. I mean, the source code itself is to some degree the memory of Linux, and people can always use that as a kind of blueprint. But there's more than that. There's also the intangible issues about why things were designed certain ways. And I think those certainly are out there, even if I weren't out there.
Let's get a burger, start thinking, the type is for printing, and the book that he prints will get people thinking. Let's lure in the little room setting, start to imagine a Bible, not a Latin, but the language we're swearing and eating and chatting. It's like this that it happens, like this that we see. Big changes through a human history, not by some powerful latest decree, but by tiny incremental degrees. Mr. Linus goes to Washington to speak about praxis, Gretchen chains, little man, and universal access. Linus against Goliath with nothing else to fill, but sling a little stone in the face of Big Bill. But Linus Jefferson's good at strings that lose, and it changes the way the world plays the blues. It's like this that it happens, like this that we see. Big changes through human history, not by some powerful latest decree, but by tiny incremental degrees. Like a butterfly in Helsinki fluttering its wings, producing hammerhead storm clouds over Beijing, when heaven-like programs become a community, and information achieves its manifest destiny, but to be free. It's like this that it happens, like this that we see. Big changes through human history, not by some powerful latest decree, but by tiny incremental degrees. It's like this that it happens, like this that we see. Big changes through human history, not by some powerful latest decree, but by tiny incremental degrees. It's like this that it happens, but that's what we see. Big changes through our human history. It's like this that it happens, like this that we see. Big changes through our human